This story is called The Birth of Rostam. It's an ancient Persian myth. Zal sat on the ivory throne of Persia, and inside his tunic, he was fingering the soft feather of his adopted mother, the only mother he had ever known, the great Simurgh bird, mythical bird of Persia. And he thought of his strange upbringing. He had been abandoned at birth by his father, the hero warrior Sam, all because he had white hair. He was left alone on a mountaintop, and the great Simurgh picked him up and took him up to her nest. The nurslings accepted him, and there he grew with them. He was taught the language of humans, for she knew he would have to be returned to his own kind. Sam, with great remorse, came after a dream and found him. And that is when the Simurgh gave him this feather and said to him, "If you are in danger, burn it. I will come." Now, Sam had grown and he absorbed all this knowledge at the court. In fact, his father, Sam, who was called away on a military campaign as usual, left him in charge of all of the lands, left him to mete out justice, and left him to administer. And he earned the respect of the Magi, the wise men of Persia, and all the people. He had great equanimity, especially for so young a man. Well, like all young men, he wanted an adventure, and he rode out to Kabul to see another land, another culture, and he was invited in by the great potentate, Mirab, for a feast in his honor that lasted all night. Now, during this, he questioned really whether he should be there. They were Assyrian, and there had been a troubled history between the Assyrians and the Persians. They were a different religion and a different culture, but still, he admired this Mirab, and he was having a wonderful, grand time. Then a chieftain, after much drink, leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Oh, there was a great moon, unparalleled, who was sequestered in the palace. It was the daughter of Mirab, Rutabe, and oh, Zal should see her." Well, her name, Rutabe, rang in his ears. And similarly, back in the harem, when Mirab returned to his queen and Rutabe, his queen Sindukt knew that he had been hosting Zal. What is this Zal? I mean, he was raised by a bird. How peculiar is that? Does he have manners? And he has white hair? Oh, he's not at all peculiar. And Mirab spoke in front of his daughter and his wife of the beauty, the sensitivity of Zal. And it is said in the East, one must never describe the physical beauty of a man in front of a woman, for she will go after that man in relentless pursuit. And something like that was going on for both of them. And she was thinking, Zal, Zal, Zal for days. And Rutabe could not eat, she could not sleep. She called her serving women and said, "I cannot eat again ever. I must have Zal, bring him to me." And they did. Now, under cover of night, she leaned over the balcony and she saw him for the first time. "Climb up to my heart." And he did. They were speechless. And they held hands, and in their precious few moments, they pledged to each other. And Zal was whisked away at dawn so they would not be caught. After this, he went directly to his father, Sam, the great warrior, the favorite of the Shah, and asked him, please consent to this marriage. I will have no other. Well, Sam had made a pledge to Zal that he would grant him whatever he really wanted. But then he knew the Shah would be angry at such a match. So he hesitated, and then Zal confronted him. You took me from my mother's arms. You took my youth. You took my love. Zal was greatly moved. He said he needed time to think. He called in astrologers who predicted that the union of Rutabe and Zal would produce a son, a hero of Persia like no other. Oh, Sam was overjoyed, and he sent this word right away to Zal that he consented. Of course, there was the matter of having the Shah of Persia to consent. Now, word of all of this got back to the court in Kabul. So Sam went to the Shah and he reported on military matters. And then he brought up the idea of this betrothal, and the Shah would not hear of it. The Shah became irate and gave the edict, you will lay waste to the palace and burn it, and you will kill the royal family. Well, Sam knew to give this some time so that the Shah could regain his composure. Now, word of this leaked to the palace in Kabul, and the great potentate Mirab was anxious and in despair, and there was weeping and wailing in the palace itself. There was panic. He considered his options. None of them were very good, but one of the most public options would be to execute his wife and his daughter. The other options were terrible as well. Now, his wife, Sindokt, presented a challenge. She was trying to keep herself and her daughter alive. And she said, great husband, why do we not buy ourselves, our lives, our freedom? Who would dare? I would dare. Break open your treasury, and I will take the best for gifts, and I will personally deliver all of it to some. Mirab thought, how daring she is. And then the idea intrigued him that if indeed some approved of this marriage, then Assyrian blood would once again ascend the throne of Persia. He liked that idea. And so Sindokt gathered gifts from the treasury, many camels, 2 elephants, 60 slaves carrying gold, silver, jewels, incense. And she dressed herself like a paladin of Persia in the long belted tunic, baggy trousers, and put a helmet on her head and rode a great steed. Oh, the entourage, the caravan stretched 2 miles in back of her. She demanded presence, an audience at the throne of Sam. He was sitting back on his ivory throne after many campaigns. When she came in, treading lightly, he looked at her quizzically. She knelt on the ground and she kissed it. And then she stood up and took off her helmet and shook out her hair. Sam, great Sam, please accept these gifts. I beg of you, accept these gifts from the court of Kabul. And do not blame the great ruler Mirab. Yes, it is true that at the palace these two children met, but it was not his doing, and he has been weeping blood for weeks over this. Do not harm this great and innocent ruler. Might you be the wife of Mirab? I will tell you who I am if you swear that you will not harm me nor my family. Well, Sam liked a quick retort. He extended his hand. She clasped it, and they shook hands. She fell again to the ground and kissed the ground, this time in gratitude. Oh, there was none other to convince after this but the Shah to consent to the marriage. And so Sam knew to send Zal with a long letter from Sam, because Zal was so disarming and so charming and so natural. All who met him loved him. And so he was received at the court of the highest of the land, the Shah Minucher. He was tested for days, answered philosophical questions and riddles, and then had to prove his prowess on a horse with a sword, martial arts, the art of warfare. He passed all these examinations, and the Shah gave his consent. A great wedding was had of Rutabe and Zal, the festivities of which lasted 4 weeks. And then Rutabe went to the throne, the ivory throne, and sat on it in Persia with her husband Zal. They meted out justice. The people loved them. At the end of this year, she was growing great with child. And Sindukt came at the 9th month, but the baby did not come. And around the 10th month, Rutabe became gravely ill, and Zal knew she was dying. And wailing was loud throughout the palace, and Sindukt rent her hair and pulled at it and her clothing. Still no baby. And Zal asked her, bring a brazier, light it. He took out the feather and he put it in the flames. The Sindukt rose out of a cloud of smoke. Listen to my counsel. Bring the finest physician in all of Persia with a steel blue blade. He will make an incision in Rutaba's side from the waist to the hip on one side there, and reach in his arms and pull out this baby who is too big for his mother, and then put the healing herbs that I leave on it and have her bound in fine silk. And after a day and night of sleep, she'll be able to hold the baby. Oh, this came true, and such a baby it was. She called him Rostam, which means I have borne fruit, and she had. Now this baby was so big and grew so rapidly that it took 20 nursemaids to nurse him. And he was walking, and they sent for the grandparents. And there in a procession, the boy somehow was balancing on a gold throne on an elephant, and Zal walked beside. And then Sam was seen in the distance. He dismounted and he went on foot and said, "Oh, great paladin," and knelt to the ground. "My grandson, may you have the courage and strength of a lion." Remarkably, this boy, barely more than a toddler, said, "Great paladin, my grandfather's son, from you I gather the strength and the courage, for you are a lion." of a man.